Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ and Friends. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and my guest today is Dr. Nicole Avena, one of the world's leading experts on sugar addiction. Her most recent book is called Sugarless, and today she's going to be talking about breaking sugar addiction with the latest science and research. Please welcome her back to the show. Good to see you.
Hi, so great to be back talking to you. Thank you again for inviting me.
Well, thank you for reaching out to me with this little project you're having, which we're going to tell people about. And I love it when guests, reach out to me because I love to get the word out. And just in case this is the first time people seeing you or maybe even seeing me, well, I mean, what is sugar addiction? Is it food addiction? Is it real? Some people doubt that you can have an addiction to food or sugar.
Yeah, so this is something that I've been studying. It feels like my whole life, but it's been most of my adult life. So, if it's okay, I have a couple slides. Is that okay if I pull up a few
Absolutely.
slides?
We love
Okay.
visuals. Yeah.
I love a visual. A good visual is always something that I welcome. So I'm gonna pull up a couple slides to kind of just frame the conversation, and then we can kind of go from there. So hopefully you can see.
Yeah, I can see it, but I can also see everything else. It just, yeah, perfect.
All right, great. So, yeah, so
Yeah.
I got interested in sugar addiction when I was a grad student. I was in Princeton, and doing a PhD in neuroscience. And one of the things that was just really, interesting at the time was that so many people were struggling with obesity, and we were starting to hear a lot about it in the media. And this is going back to the year 2000. I don't want to date myself, but here we are. Um, and what ended up being the case back then, those of us who remember it, right, was that it was thought that if you were struggling with obesity, it was your fault because you didn't have willpower. And I kind of thought, well, maybe there's more to it than that because it seems like these people have plenty of willpower. It's just that the foods are so powerful, these processed foods, the sugar. A lot of people were really drawn towards sugar. That was the thing that was very difficult to help them break free from. And so we started doing some research, kind of looking at that through the lens of addiction and so trying to just really ask these questions like, is sugar an addictive substance? Just like we all know drugs and alcohol can be addictive substances. So basically, we kicked off this whole series of experiments and we started publishing all of these papers, really just asking that very question, Chef AJ, is like, is sugar addiction real? Is this something that we can actually measure? And so that's pretty much how it kind of started for me. And then, from there, we've just been doing more and more research to kind of elucidate it.
Well, how do you do this research?
Well, we have a couple of different things that we've been doing. So, and again, when I say we, I mean, obviously myself and my research team, but there is a large group of scientists out there who are studying this. I actually just came back from Minnesota last week. I was at a conference that is sanctioned by the Nobel organization. It's like a Nobel light, if you will, but they focus on topics every year that they think are extremely important. And this year's topic was sugar. And so there were scientists from all over studying sugar and how it affects the brain and the body and in different capacities. So it's definitely something that more and more people are studying. We've been doing these experiments really two different ways. We do preclinical studies. So that's where we do laboratory animal studies. This is, where we use, different types of formats to do that. We can do modeling, we can use laboratory animals, but we also then will do clinical studies as well. So a lot of our earlier research was conducted on some preclinical studies, and now we kind of dovetail that with clinical studies as well. And at the end, I want to put up a slide that talks about one of our newer studies that we're recruiting for, because one of the things that we're trying to do now is really get a global assessment of what's going on when it comes to sugar, because we know that this isn't just a problem in the United States. This is something that we're seeing happening in a lot of other countries, and countries that don't really have the infrastructure to support all of the medical conditions that can come up when people overconsume sugar.
Wow, that's really something. Is sugar addiction just sugar addiction, or is it sugar something else addiction, like sugar fat, sugar salt, sugar flour? Because I don't know a lot of people that just have trouble with Jolly Ranchers.
No, you're right. And I think that's where this whole concept of like processed food comes into play. And so, yeah, we started off looking at sugar. I'm going to just skip ahead in some of these slides, but I might
Seeing
kind
your
of bounce
slides
around.
right now, by the way. I'm not seeing your slides, but it could be on my end.
Oh, maybe. Well, in either case, the real like question of is it, sugar in a vacuum, right? Or is it sugar in something else? It's really, I think, kind of both. We consume sugar when we add it to our coffee, when we, add it to certain things that we're baking. And in that capacity, we kind of have control over it. But I think one of the bigger issues that people are facing these days is the added sugar that is in processed foods. So when we talk about processed foods, I really think that's the common denominator is added sugar. And people might say, well, what's the big deal about processed foods, right? And we're hearing a lot about this in the media right now, and we have a lot of questions being raised about, okay, should we be, I don't know, putting warning labels on processed food? Should we be, having there be changes in terms of the way in which the information is presented on, the nutrition facts panel? There's lots of questions that are being put forward because what we're seeing in other countries is that, yeah, they're putting warning labels on processed food. They're making it more transparent how much sugar is in these ultra processed products. So I think that it really boils down to the fact that we're often consuming sugar in a manner where we don't even realize how much we're consuming, and often that is because of all of the processed foods that we are consuming. So if you think about it, when you have a food, it can sometimes appear to be natural, right? Like, for I'll give an example of a substance in nature that once you process it, it becomes different. So coca leaf, for example. Coca leaf is something that, you could chew on it. It doesn't really cause a problem, and people will, use it in parts of the world where it's indigenous. But if you process it, extract all the ingredients, and add a bunch of chemicals to it, you can turn it into something that can be highly addictive, like cocaine or crack cocaine. So the idea is, well, can we maybe say the same thing about some other products where you change it from its natural form by processing it and turn it into something that can be highly addictive and different than what it used to be? And I think that's really the bottom line is we're seeing the formula for lots of different foods that we've been eating over the years. For example, I have this slide that I often show when I give lectures on this topic of potato chips, for example. It used to be potato chips were just potatoes, vegetables, and salt. Now the ingredients list is a mile long. So, and you often see sugar as one of those ingredients. So I think that's really the problem these days is that the processed foods are becoming so overly processed, and they often are kind of an avenue for sugar to be sneaking into our diet when we don't even realize it.
Didn't our ancestors, like the hunter-gatherer tribes, eat sugar in the form of honey as something like up to 20% of their calories?
Absolutely. And so, when we go back to our hunter and gatherer ancestors, those individuals, I think of them often. I really do. Their ears must be ringing because, we still have their brains, right? We still have that mentality and mindset, right? Our brains have not evolved all that much from back when we were hunters and gatherers. And yes, when we were hunters and gatherers, we used to eat a lot of honey. We used to eat a lot of fruit when we would find it. But the idea, though, back then was that you really had to forage for your food, right? So we would have, seasonal access to fruits. So you wouldn't have strawberries 12 months a year. You'd have strawberries in the spring if you happen to live in the Northeast. You'd have them maybe for a longer season if you lived in the South. It depends where you lived, but you certainly didn't have them in January. So again, we had more constraints around when we had access to sugar, and we would go periods of time where we would fast from it to some degree, right? Because we just wouldn't have access to it. We also had to forage for the food, meaning you might have to walk a couple miles until you found a berry bush. And yeah, when you found one, great, eat all the berries because you can't store them at home, right? We can't stick them in the refrigerator. And so again, you didn't know when you were going to get your last meal. So it wasn't uncommon for, our hunter and gatherers to binge on food when they found it. And so, yes, it was commonplace for us to consume sugars in that natural form. Now, keep in mind, the sugars of today are very, very different in the sense of, the fact that when we talk about added sugar, we're talking about, the powdered stuff that's being put into our food by the food companies or by ourselves. The sugar that we have in our fruits that we, maybe buy at the farmer's market or grow in our garden, they contain sugar, but it's packaged in a way that has fiber and other nutrients. So it's not going to provide this sort of jolt of dopamine that happens when we eat a candy bar or we eat a piece of cake or something like that. So again, I often think of our ancestors in this way because we're still walking around with these primitive brains that are drawn towards sugar because it's safe, it's good for us. But in our modern food environment, it's often not because it's packaged in a way that contains lots of other things that are not really that good for our health.
Yeah. And they weren't eating it with flour and they weren't eating it with fat and they weren't eating it with salt. They were literally just eating the honey.
Yeah, exactly. And again, I think that there's something to be said for that. And I've gotten really interested in this over the past several years of, the combinations of ingredients and how when well, you're a chef, you know this better than anybody, how you can really create some amazingly different tastes by just combining different ingredients in different amounts. This is why when you bake a cake, if you don't put the right amount of certain ingredients in it, it's not going to look that great and certainly not going to taste that great. And so there's a very strong science behind ingredient combinations. And unfortunately, the food industry has picked up on that over the years, and they've utilized that science to create these combinations of ingredients that are just beyond what we would ever experience in nature. And often, they create this richness, deliciousness, saltiness, all these flavors kind of exploding in our mouth and then in our brain at the same time. And it really makes us compelled to eat it. And again, that's what's happening when it comes to this addiction piece that we've been talking about.
And I'm sure you're familiar with the book Sugar Blues, right? Everybody that's in this
Yes.
space has read it. And I don't think the problem is sugar as a condiment, it's sugar as a food. And if somebody sprinkled a little sugar here and there, like a little bit on their oatmeal or something, it's way different than having entire meals based on sugar, which breakfast is, by the way, in America. Breakfast it is dessert for most people. A Cinnabon, box cereal is basically sugar and flour.
Absolutely. I think, that's one of the things that we lose sight of if we don't leave the US, right? If you don't take trips overseas or don't like go to other countries or even go up to Canada, you don't have to really go all that far. There's different types of cultural norms regarding food. And I think here in the US, we have completely normified the whole idea, like you said, that breakfast is dessert. And if you look at what is put out, even if you go stay in a hotel in the United States, I mean, you're really hard pressed to find things that don't have sugar or aren't supposed to have sugar added to them, right? So it's become the case that, yeah, if, and I've heard this from a lot of friends who move here from other countries or colleagues that I meet who come from other countries, that one of the biggest complaints people have about the food here is that it's too sweet. Even the bread they claim was too sweet. And I think as Americans, we often, don't realize that because we're kind of immersed in it. We don't realize it because we see it on the day to day. So it just becomes normal. But the reality is that, yeah, our foods are very, very different here. And especially like you said, breakfast, that's become completely dominated by sugar and flour and, not what I think a healthy breakfast should really look like.
And also it's a combination like sugar and caffeine, like, that's just as deleterious, don't you think, when you put them together, whether it's too much sugar in somebody's coffee or tea or especially soda, because it seems like most people I know that are addicted to soda, I don't hear a lot of people saying it's 7 Up and root beer. It's usually Mountain Dew or Coke, Dr. Pepper, the ones with the caffeine.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, the highest concentration of caffeine are definitely the ones that rank highest in terms of the ones that people tend to get hooked on. And I think you're right that that combination of sugar and caffeine is really, what's driving that desire. And I think that it's being taken over now by the energy drink industry, right? And so we have, basically what those like higher level sodas were doing and those colas were doing in terms of how much caffeine and sugar they were putting together. Now the energy drink business is doing, and they're putting together these, very high caffeine, very high sugar beverages that, yeah, they'll get you going because guess what? They're containing, these really high amounts of these two very um, potent stimulants. And I think that, again, if they're used in moderation alone, if you're having 1 cup of coffee for breakfast, with your breakfast, or maybe you have one in the afternoon, it doesn't have a ton of sugar in it. I don't really think there's much wrong with that. Enjoy your coffee. But the problem becomes that, if you go to the coffee shops and you see, or even, places where you can get, beverages. I mean, the volume that people are consuming is very, very large, and it is containing both caffeine and sugar. And I think that's where, we get into this dangerous business. I know, a lot of the teenagers these days, I have a teenager, so I'm pretty dialed into what's going on in that world. There's this like coffee culture of like going to the coffee shop after school and getting your coffee drink, or showing up at school with your coffee. And the reality is there's very little coffee and a lot of sugar in those drinks. And so we're kind of setting our teens up for this mindset and lifestyle of like, oh, I need to always be walking around my big giant cup of caffeine and sugar, which is not good, especially when you're only a teen and have a teen brain.
Because we really didn't eat caffeine historically. I mean, like you said, we could chew a little cocoa leaf. I remember when I was little, if I had a stomach, and mom would give me some ginger ale, but I would never want ginger ale any other time. But boy, would I want Coke or Dr. Pepper, big difference.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's true. Caffeine has, it's an interesting ingredient. And, I think it, naturally occurs obviously, from coffee and tea. That's kind of where it originated in terms of landing in our diets. But much like everything else, we can take something and just like, make it much more potent, and, make it much more concentrated. And I think that's what's happened, with, the caffeine industry, in the sense that now it's become, okay, well, forget just coffee and tea. Why not do, caffeinated other beverages, right? Like, why not do these like functional beverages that have caffeine? I actually just got a granola bar sent to me from a company where there's caffeine in the granola bar. So, it's become almost like, I guess, somewhat of a under the halo of health, somewhat of a marketing kick, I think, where, people are thinking, oh, if people want their energy, but maybe they don't want it from sugar, so let's just throw some caffeine in there. Not sure if that's the safest strategy here, especially when a lot of these products are being marketed towards younger people who could be really sensitive to the effects that caffeine can have.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Susanna is saying that she loved your book, Sugarless. I agree. That was a really, really good book. I have a bunch of questions if you'd like to take some of them from some of
Oh,
you.
absolutely. Absolutely.
Before I get to them, I was just thinking that, there's an old saying in toxicology, the poison is in the dose. And, like you mentioned, other countries, desserts, I was a pastry chef, and there are people, you endorsed my book, Sweet Indulgence. All
Hmm.
the desserts are sweetened with fruit, dates sometimes, but other fruits. And a lot of people say, oh, your desserts aren't sweet enough. And to me, they're plenty sweet. It depends what else you're eating. Because if you go to France or Japan, their desserts are not as sweet as the United States.
Well, can I just say one thing about that? And I think this will help people who maybe like taste your desserts and think they're not sweet enough. That's a classic neuroscience psychological phenomenon that's happening. It's called negative contrast. It's when you have something that's so intense and you're offered something that's normal. The thing that's normal actually doesn't seem normal. It seems less than it should be because your brain is so used to this chronic intensity. So it'd be like if I said, oh, Chef AJ, every week for the next 2 months, I'm going to give you $100. And you would say, okay, great, yay. And I would give you the $100. And then let's just say after the 2 months, I said, Chef AJ, next week I'm going to give you $75. You would be like, oh, all right, I guess so. Because you're used to having $100 a week for me, but now I'm only giving you 75. So it doesn't like loses a little bit of its like lure, right? But meanwhile, if I never offered you $100 ever, you'd be so happy if I gave you $75. So again, it's that negative contrast coming in, and your brain just needs time to adjust to the lack of that constant sugar stimulation. Then you start to feel like things that have a normal amount of sugar actually do taste just fine and taste sweet enough.
There's so few people in the world we can point to, but when you were logging on and Dr. Alan Goldhammer was accidentally on, he had the wrong day. He raised his son without any sugar. His son is, I think, almost 40 now. He's never even had maple syrup. And the kid is like the healthiest eater. And he thinks like Brussels sprouts are like the most delicious thing in the world. So his whole frame of reference is different. Never, I mean, he's had, fruit and dates and things like that, but he's never had processed sugar or processed flour. And he enjoys whole natural food, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, legumes, nuts, and seeds, because that's all he knows.
Yeah, and I bet if he actually had a processed sugar thing, product, he would probably get nauseous. He would probably find it revolting because again, his brain is accustomed to this sort of like normal amount of sugar. And when you then taste something, and kid, this happens with kids too. Kids live in different sensory worlds than adults, so kids' brains are actually programmed to be a little bit higher than ours in terms of their preference. That's why, a lot of the cereals are marketed towards kids and they have a lot of sugar added to them. Adults don't really want that, right? As much so. And so, yeah, the same thing can happen, as we age, we tend to lose our, preference for sweet. But if we're hooked on it, then that is a different story. And I think that's what's happening now. We're seeing less and less of that happen as people get older because they're actually addicted to this stuff from consuming it most of their life.
Yeah, when I used to be work in retirement home as an activity director, you can tell like they were always sucking on Werther's candy or butterscotch candy, even into their hundreds. That's very interesting. So let's get to some of these great questions from the people in the Chef AJ and Friends community. We'll start with the one from Susanna. My granddaughter is 16 months old, and thankfully, my son and daughter-in-law have kept her off sugar so far. They want to stick to this until she is 2 years old to give her a good start. How can I convince them to keep her on this great healthy track after her second birthday? You see that a lot on the internet. 1 year old, the smash cakes,
Yeah.
this is, oh my gosh.
Yeah, no, I think that is so great that they're able to do this and they're committed to doing it. And I really think that they got to take it as far as they can because the reality is it's only going to serve their child later in life, right? If they can, and it's not just about like from the health standpoint, right? We know that too much added sugar is contributing to all of these medical conditions like diabetes, the development of cardiovascular disease, obesity, all these things that happen later in life, right? So, yeah, when you're in your 30s, 40s, 50s, like these things might happen as a result of the dietary preferences that you establish as a kid. So, you have a better chance of preventing them from happening if you can raise your child to have a healthy relationship with food and to not be overly reliant on sugars and all of these ultra processed foods. So yeah, I think it's a great goal to, say let's go till the second birthday, but then I think it's a good idea to try to extend it beyond. I definitely recommend checking out my book, What to Feed Your Baby and Toddler, because in that book, I talk about all of the research on how what kids eat in early life has a long-term impact on their health, their mental health, their immune system functioning, their cognitive abilities. I mean, it's just amazing how much is dependent on nutrition early in life. So the longer they can take it, the better. And, I hate to say this, but as a mom myself with kids in the schools, it's going to sneak its way into their diet. They're going to go to someone's house and get sugar. They're going to, have a teacher that like hands out lollipops. Like it's going to happen. The more they can limit it at home, the better. And that's going to help the child learn to put, some guardrails up and to kind of police their own intake so that they are not overdoing it.
Right, because the kids, at some point, the kid's going to go out, they're going to get it anyway. So why have it at home? Just, I don't know. I just know how hard it is when you get addicted at an early age. And so the longer
Yeah, absolutely.
the better, because I think it's more of a drug than a food. Thank you. Sarah asks, what are your thoughts about food obsession being caused by early childhood trauma? I ask because I believe my desire or need to control food results from something deep inside my body, resulting from when I was a pre-verbal toddler.
There is absolutely scientific research that backs up what you're saying. So there's something called the ACEs scores. It's called Adverse Childhood Event, ACE. And this has been something that has been widely studied, and it has been shown that the more adverse experience you experience as a child, and these vary in terms of things like, divorce, fighting in the family, drug use, things like that, um, the more likely you are to have adverse problems later in life when it comes to physical health and mental health, right? So this just really goes back to that like thing we all kind of know is we have to care for our children and love them, because what they experience early on can have a long-term impact on their physical health and mental health. Now, when it comes to food, this certainly plays a role. There's been lots of studies that have pointed to higher ACEs scores being linked with the greater risk for developing obesity. And I think what happens is that people end up self-medicating a trauma and not maybe coping with that trauma, or, getting the support that they need to appropriately work through that trauma. They end up self-medicating with food. And it's a socially acceptable way to self-medicate. You don't have to get a prescription for it. And a lot of people do it, and it's not ideal. It's really not. And so I think that, anyone who feels like they're using food as a way to self-soothe and to self-medicate, you really do need to be mindful of the fact that that could be covering up for some other thing that maybe happened that you need to deal with in a different way, so that you can, feel well and be happy.
Thank you. I didn't realize this because I see you perfectly, but apparently the viewers are still seeing your slides. So I don't know if
Oh,
you're,
okay. Well, I'm gonna just should I just stop sharing them? I feel like
unless you
I'll
have something
probably.
else to, because I personally have not seen your slides. So, but on the other,
Ah, okay. Well, I'm gonna skip ahead. I just want to show, maybe we could just plug the study, and then we could just go through some more of the questions that you have, and I'll turn the slides off. But one thing I just wanted to call out was that we are recruiting, and this is, I had initially reached out to Chef AJ to ask if she could help me promote this, and so that's why I'm so grateful for her inviting me on today to talk, and also to then be able to promote for our new study. So if you're interested in being involved as a research participant, it's super easy. It's an online survey. All you have to do is, if you can, take a screenshot of this image right here, you can click on that QR code, and it'll take you right to the survey. It takes about 10 minutes to fill out. It's really important that we better understand the global impact that sweet preferences have. And so this is a collaboration with colleagues in the United Kingdom, and in the European Union, who are interested in, getting assessment of like the global impact of sweetness and sweet craving. So if you are able to, I would really appreciate if you could share about this. And we're hoping to, ramp up our recruitment here in the US.
great. Thank you. So I want to see, are your slides still on? Because I'm not seeing them, but the viewers seem to be.
I just clicked it off. I just
Let me
this.
double check. Okay, that could be. And we'll put, yes, I can see you now. We'll put that all in the show notes. Thank you. So wow, I'm still seeing it. Susanna, are you still seeing the slides? This is weird. Okay, well, anyway, I'm going to ask you the next question from Laura, which is, I've said and heard others say this 1,000 times in my life. After having a savory, salty meal, maybe even overeating, feeling stuffed and miserable afterwards, we find ourselves saying, now I need something sweet. What's happening in our brains when this happens? Why do we crave sugar after a calorie-dense meal?
So I'm very glad that you asked this question. It boils down to the fact that we have two types of hunger. We have the hunger for calories, nutrition, the things that we need in our diet to help us to, survive, right? We have all of these, cravings for things, and that's what promotes us to be hungry. But then we also have another type of hunger that's called hedonic hunger. And that is simply just the desire to feel pleasure from the food that we're eating. And so that is why, even though you're not quote unquote hungry, you're still hungry for the pleasure. You're hungry for the sweet sensation, right? That feeling of euphoria, that like hit of dopamine that you're going to get, the opioids that are going to be released, right? So that is basically, hunger from the neck up. And I think I look at the first type of hunger for, needing calories and nutrition as hunger from the neck down, right? So again, it's important to kind of be mindful of that, because you aren't really hungry for dessert, right? You're not always hungry for dessert. You are often just hungry for that pleasant sensation that comes along with eating a dessert. And so if you can think that through, it might be helpful when you do order dessert, because I'm not saying don't order dessert. I'm saying maybe you decide, okay, I'll order dessert, but I only need one bite of it to get the pleasure. Because if you think about it, the pleasure is in the first bite. Beyond that, it's just, other stuff, right? The guilt and all that other stuff that's going to come along with it. So if you can, have a dessert and get one bite and feel satisfied, then that's going to, fill that void, and you can have your hedonic hunger satisfied, and it will not necessarily, translate into that the guilt and the shame that often comes around when people are overeating desserts.
Well, what about that saying by Kay Shepherd, one bite is too many, a thousand bites never enough?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That is exactly it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm getting the links now in the chat in the show notes. Okay. So the next question is from Lisa. Sugar addict here. What foods would we be surprised to find out lead to sugar binges, like bread, salty foods, etc.?
Well, in terms of what foods lead, in terms of which foods are most addictive, I had a slide on this. I should have, this is one of the things when you have a conversation, but you have visuals, it's kind of hard to predict where things will go. But in one of the visuals I had, it was an excerpt from one of our studies where we actually did a study to like rank order the most addictive foods. And it turns out that the most addictive foods are the things you probably would have imagined, it turns out the number one food is pizza, then it's followed by chocolate, and then chips, and then cookies, and then ice cream. And one of the things that was really interesting when we conducted this study was that it's not necessarily how sweet the food is, but it was actually when we did the analyses of the different factors that were associated with all the different foods that we had cataloged, it was the level of processing that dictated how addictive the food was. So the more processed the food, the more likely it was to be addictive. Now, in our modern food environment, there's a pretty strong correlation between being highly processed and having a lot of added sugar. Most processed foods have added sugar. So the two in some ways are synonymous, but I think it does kind of speak to this idea that, yeah, if you're looking to kind of rank order or figure out like, okay, well, I feel like I'm addicted to food, sugar rich foods for sure. The best thing you could do is to filter out first the most processed sugar rich foods, right? So the ones that are the most highly processed and contain sugar, and start there and then kind of chip away at them, because those are the ones that are going to have the most addiction potential.
Right. I mean, they put it in everything from tomato sauce to condiments to salad dressings, places where it's not even really necessary.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the hidden sugar, I often say, if we had any other addictive substance on earth that was sprinkled into our food like it is with sugar, I mean, there would be, like riots, right? I mean, if you think about it, imagine if the little bit of cocaine was in the salad dressing that you had, and a little bit of cocaine was in that bread that you bought at the bakery, a little bit of cocaine was in the tomato sauce. Like the most recent one that I came across, someone sent to me, was a frozen pizza. It was just a plain pepperoni frozen pizza, and it had like 26% of the daily recommended amount of added sugar. And I'm like, but why? It doesn't even taste sweet. Why? And again, keep in mind, sugar is added for a couple reasons. One, it's added because it's addictive, right? People like it. Two, it's also a really good flavor masker. So if you have a frozen pizza that's going to last in the freezer for 10 years, it's going to have a lot of preservatives in it. And those preservatives don't always really taste that great. So one way to mask those off-putting flavors of the preservatives is to add a bunch of sugar to it. And that's, one of the reasons why we see sugar hidden in so many of these places where it really just doesn't belong.
I'm surprised that pizza beat chocolate. I thought chocolate was number one.
So I think it depends on your audience, right? So we didn't survey people who, we didn't break this in this one particular study, and we have other studies that are going to look deeper at this. We didn't break people up based off of, whether they're sweet preference or carbohydrate preference. Like, in future studies, we've been kind of breaking people up into their preferred types of foods that they will turn to if they want to have something as a treat. Because there are different camps of people. There are people who have a strong sweet tooth. And then there's people who are more on the salty, savory side. And then there's people who are more on those like richer carbohydrates, like, the pastas and the breads. They don't necessarily need it to have sugar on it, right? But they just, crave that type of carbohydrate. So I think we looked at just the general population in this study, but if we were to break it into different categories, I think we probably see these things shift a little bit in their rankings.
Got it. Okay. Well, why is the processed food industry so powerful? Can't they be called to task like the tobacco industry was? Well, actually, they bought all the processed food companies, so
Yeah, so this is like phase 2 for tobacco, right? They moved on to food. Yeah, many of them are now owned by companies that are, the parent companies of tobacco products. Um, but yeah, so I think what's happening is we actually are seeing this as, tobacco phase 2, in the sense that many of the things that we saw happen during, the 1950s and 60s and 70s that kind of gave way to us changing the way that we view tobacco products in the US is starting to happen now with sugar. And so if you went back to the 1950s, 60% of US adults smoked cigarettes, actively were smoking cigarettes. And that number is much, much lower now. And again, it's because back then it was thought that, tobacco products are safe. It's okay to smoke. You had dentists and doctors in the ads saying, "Oh, I smoke this brand of cigarette because it's, good for my teeth." And, so you had these influential people endorsing these products and saying that they were healthy. And so, of course, the American public said, "Okay, well, this doctor guy is saying it's healthy. So, okay, I'll smoke it." It wasn't until we started to see the research roll in about the addictive nature of nicotine, about the dangers of smoking tobacco, about it being, associated with a whole host of medical conditions, that we started to get regulation, that we started to see labels put on. We started to see limitations of where it could be sold. We started to see, it was banned on the airplane. But that all took time. And again, I think we're just kind of scratching the surface now when it comes to ultra processed food, and it's going to take some time, unfortunately. But I think enough people are connecting the dots that there's something here that's harming our health, and the food is definitely part of it. And we need to kind of get ahead of that. Otherwise, we're just setting our kids up for this, generation of people who are going to have even more health problems than our generation has.
yeah, thank you. Okay. Here's a question from Giselle. Is sugar addiction inherited or just modeled by parents and others? How does emotional stress or trauma impact the cravings?
Such great question. So the answer is both. So there's a genetic component, and there's been some studies that have looked specifically at a certain genetic allele, a polymorphism in a dopamine gene that has been shown to be associated with having a greater risk for developing a food addiction. And also, interestingly enough, that same allele of the dopamine gene has been linked to development of other types of addictions as well, like, for example, alcohol addiction. And it in part explains some of the familial transition of alcohol use disorder from one generation to the other. And that again is, part of the genetic underlying of food addiction as well. So yes, there is this genetic component that it can be passed down, but that doesn't mean that it's 100% due to genetics. And the genetic component really isn't a sentence. It means that you're at risk, right? Greater risk. So if you have a parent that struggled with food addiction, yes, you want to be mindful of that, and perhaps be, more aware of your own relationship with food, knowing that you're at greater risk because of your genetics. But the modeling piece is also a big part of it. And again, this is important because we really do take a lot of our early experiences with food from our family, right? From we're eating what our parents are providing for us, right? What's being made in the home is what we're eating, and the food attitudes, the preferences are really very much being shaped at a very early age, and a lot of that is going to be dictated by the people who also contributed the genes to you, right? So I think it's important to be mindful of both. um, and then to answer the last part of your question about, sort of trauma and stress, yes, I think this kind of goes back to the previous question regarding adverse experiences. I think a lot of people, unbeknownst to themselves, are using sugar and processed food as a way to just cope with the daily stressors of life. And, it can give you that kind of quick feeling of, goodness, of like that quick dopamine hit. And it's convenient, and it is something that, can temporarily make people feel a little bit better, right? If they're stressed out or if they're sad or if, they're, just in a moment where they kind of need a mood pickup. Well, if you have ice cream, that sometimes will do it for you, right? And so I think that we need to keep that in mind too, as a way to self monitor that we're not doing that too much, because I think that's where people fall into a trap of, using food beyond just, okay, I'm having this as a sweet treat, but now I'm also using it to medicate my mood. And now I'm also, addicted to it. And so then that's where people find that they're in this spiral where they're constantly using and craving these foods.
Thank you. Leviticus, who's watching live, asks if sugar and cake lowers testosterone.
Oh, that's an interesting question. So, the relationship between consuming too much added sugar, and then keep in mind, this is all about the doses, right? If you have, a piece of cake, it's not going to make your testosterone levels drop. But if you have a piece of cake regularly and you're, having deficiencies in your diet in other ways, because maybe instead of eating, vegetables and proteins, you're, having cake and other sweets that are ultra processed and have a lot of chemicals and ingredients in it that come along with just the nature of the processing, then yes, it's going to have an impact on your hormones. It's going to, over time, have a negative impact on your body's ability to be able to regulate your hormone levels. And I think that this is even more important as people get older, when they start to experience hormonal shifts. I often hear women asking me about this, especially women who are in the perimenopause or menopause stage of life, because that's when people start to see how, small changes in their diet can have a really significant impact. And women tend to find that because their hormones have changed, it's not like easy to, maintain the same body shape, right? And again, that goes back to the fact that what we eat can have a significant impact on our hormones. It can have a significant impact on our body's ability to metabolize food because of those hormonal shifts. So yes, it is an important piece of the puzzle when it comes to hormone health too. So that's why we do want to be mindful of our habits early on, because the older us will be thanking the younger us later on if we can establish healthy habits from the beginning.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so this question, I saved it for last of the ones that were previously submitted because it's kind of long, from Leanna. I struggle with binging, cramming, emotional eating, even after having had a gastric bypass 23 years ago. My stomach size is now back to a normal size, I'm sure. Sometimes I will eat raw carrots or cruciferous vegetables that do not digest for me and cause severe pain, like this just happened a few days ago. I get crazy munchies, so I try to choose healthy, crunchy things, but I know it will cause pain after. Losing this weight is my focus all day long, every day since I've been 10 years old, and I'm 59. It seems I'm not in control of my actions, although I am the only one putting food in my mouth. When I weigh myself, the devastation of gaining or the elation of losing rules my mood that day. I gained 35 pounds this last year after a knee break and some other problems, and I was only 17 pounds from my goal of 150 pounds. I'm now 52 or so pounds away from it. How do I get my mind, heart, head, and actions all together as a healthy person with normal behavior? And how can I live without this daily struggle? I think she speaks for probably a lot of people.
I was just going to say, thank you for sharing that. And you can't even imagine how many you just spoke for so many people in that. There were so many things that you just said that so many people struggle with. And, so I just thank you for sharing about your story. And um, I will say that you can do it. It's just a matter of, I think, understanding. And it sounds like, with the gastric bypass, you've addressed it from the neck down, right? Now it's time to address it from the neck up, and that's where the addiction piece comes in. And that's where, understanding, what's driving the cravings, understanding, what's driving the munchies that you're experiencing. Is it boredom? Is it stress? Is it, because you're not distracted by something else, right? You have to get to the root source of what's causing you to have this ability to crave these things, and to, you know make that dominate your life, because that doesn't have to be like that. That's just about redirecting your thoughts and your mindset, and basically just reshaping your relationship with food. So I definitely recommend please check out my book Sugarless. I think this would really help because in here I talk about the psychology of eating and about, how our modern food environment and a lot of the messaging is kind of like, co-opted us all into thinking, oh yeah, it's okay to eat this to, feel better and self-soothing, and how we end up mindlessly doing that and don't even realize it. And I also talk about, this whole idea of like not basing our self-worth on a number. And I think, and I have daughters, so we're very tuned into like, you don't weigh yourself, you don't, we just want to be healthy and, be strong, and be active. And I think that that has to be the goal. I think if you're finding that, you're getting hung up on and it's affecting your mood, like if you're up or down or whatever it's going to be, so many things can impact our body weight. And so if you start exercising more or start, maybe doing some strength training, you may not see the numbers go down, but that's because you still could be losing body fat, but you're gaining muscle. And so when you're in your 50s, that's the goal. It's not, it should no longer be about a number on the scale, but it should just really, if you can tell yourself, like, I just got to get healthy. I got to build muscle. I got to eat healthy so that I could feel good as I go into the later part of my life. I think that can really help with, making it easier and not making it so like, oh, I gained or I lost, because it's really beyond that. It's about a lot more than that.
Can you talk a little bit about fat? Because when I think about the people I know that tell me they're sugar addicts, it's like I said, it's not Twizzlers, it's not gummy bears, it's not Jolly Ranchers. It's candies, cakes, cookies, pies, and ice cream. It's sugar and fat together.
Yeah, it is. And again, we've done some studies on this. And so we've looked at, sugar fat combinations. And when we do these studies, we see that the combination of fat and sweet, it seems to produce this desire of, sweetness and satiety and savoriness that you get from stimulating all of those different types of desires that we have in our brain, right? And so I think that, when we put those two together, it really does create this somewhat perfect storm of, making it such that it's pleasurable and, it does enhance the palatability. Because if you think about it, it's, yes, sugar is part of the vehicle of driving the addiction. I think sugar is the primary driver of the car, but there's, other people in the getaway car with sugar, right? It's not just the sugar, it's what it's packaged along with that makes it so dangerous and makes it so addictive in many cases. In our studies, we've been kind of focused in on sugar from the empirical standpoint because as scientists, one of the first questions that we had was, okay, is food addictive? Is ultra processed food addictive? Are cookies addictive? But from a scientific standpoint, we have to be a little bit more precise and say, okay, well, what is it about the cookies and about, these other things that we tend to overeat that makes them addictive? And so we've been able to show that the sugar seems to be the common denominator, but that doesn't mean that the route of administration is just, sugar. No one's consuming packets of sugar, right? They're consuming sugar, like you said, packaged along with these other types of savory ingredients that create this ultra processed product that is what can ultimately become very addictive for many people.
Thank you. So, Lori, who's watching live, says the title of this talk is Breaking Sugar Addiction. So, how do we break out of this?
Well, I can tell you it is possible. It is something that many, many people have done. And it is unfortunately the part that no one likes to hear is that it doesn't happen overnight. It takes work and it takes time to basically retrain your brain. And you need to be able to understand that it's a process, right? Just like anything else. And so when I talk about this in my book, Sugarless, I have a 7-step plan that I put together to help people because it can be overwhelming. I think most people have woken up on January 1st and said, okay, this year I'm going to do it. I'm going to lose the weight. I'm going to clean up my diet. And then, 4 or 5 or 6 days into it, well, maybe we'll try in February 1st. And then, oh, maybe we'll try next year. We all know that it's not easy. And I think that's because people overwhelm themselves. They say, okay, well, I'm never having sugar again. I'm wiping it all out and I'm getting rid of all the processed foods. I'm going to exercise every day and I'm going to do all this stuff. And it sounds great and it's noble, but it's not sustainable. And so I take a more sustainable approach. I help people walk through the different steps. And so I'll tell you the first step is getting a handle on your beverages. The vast majority of sugar that people is eating or consuming comes from beverages. It's in the form of sodas, it's in the form of these, ridiculous coffees that have more sugar in them than they do coffee. It's in the form of juices. And so really just kind of looking at what you're drinking and figuring out how you can cut back the sugar as much as possible. I don't really advocate a cold turkey approach because I really think that in our modern food environment, it's kind of impossible to go cold turkey when the sugar is hidden everywhere, right? Even if you want to quit sugar, it's going to be difficult because it's going to sneak into your diet if you're going out to a restaurant or you're, buying, food at the grocery store. Like it's going to get into your diet even when you don't realize it. And so I think a better approach is to take the approach of a harm reduction, meaning that you work hard to systematically chip away at reducing the sugar in your diet and starting with your beverages. That might mean, if your thing is you go to the drive through and get your coffee every morning on the way to work and it has a certain number of sugars in it, okay, but don't get the full amount of sugar. Maybe you get half of that. And I bet you wouldn't even notice it after a couple of days, right? It's going to make no difference. It's like you were always consuming it with less sugar. And so that's really the goal, is to kind of systematically chip away. And so I think it's very possible. It's just a matter of understanding, the steps, understanding the psychology too. There's a lot that goes into it beyond just like, okay, eat this and not that, or reduce my sugar here. There's also this social component. And I think that's what a lot of people struggle with, is the peer pressure that we experience to eat sugar all the time. If you go to someone's house, they'll say, "Oh, well, come on, it's my birthday. Aren't you going to have some of my birthday cake?" And it's like, "Well, maybe I'm not because I'm not hungry." Or, "Oh, I'll have a piece later." But helping to, understand and have the tools of how to deal with those social situations, which can kind of get awkward. And if you're not, one of those people who doesn't care what other people think, like I've turned into, then it's going to maybe be difficult. So I help people to kind of work through those social situations, work through, how do you navigate in our sugar laden world when you're trying to reduce your dependence on sugar?
Absolutely. We're surrounded by a sea of addicts. If this isn't too personal, Dr. Avena, do you personally consume sugar and did you feed it to your kids when they were growing up?
Oh, it's absolutely not too personal. So I do consume sugar, but in very, very moderate amounts. And I would say I consume sugar in the form of mostly fruits. And in terms of added sugar, it's a rarity, to be honest. And it's mostly because I've just been able to develop a way of shopping and a way of, eating, that I don't really need it. I'll have cake if I go out to dinner with my family, but I'll have like one bite of it. I don't need the whole piece of cake, right? I like the sweet sensation that I get from one little bite, and that's enough to do it for me. So again, I didn't grow up that way though. I grew up in a house. I'm a first generation college student. I have very working class parents, and nothing against them, but they didn't really value health. And so we had soda all the time. Like if you had dinner over my house, like you would be served Coca-Cola. We rarely had milk in the house. So I was raised to be a sugar addict essentially. And when I got to college and kind of, had more control over my own diet, I started to realize like, wow, I actually feel a lot better when I don't eat all this sugar and I don't drink soda and I don't do those things. And so that kind of, always has been in the back of my mind as my kind of personal experience. Um, in terms of my kids have been, again, being my kids, having to, listen to me talk about this stuff their whole life. They've become very good at being able to put the guardrails up for what they eat. And so my 17-year-old daughter, she is a very healthy eater. She's also an athlete, so she knows the value of what she eats and how it's going to translate into her performance. So, again, they're normal kids. My younger one is 10. They'll have a sweet treat now and then, but they know that if it was Susie's birthday at school and the cupcakes were brought in, that they're not even thinking about having dessert because they had it at school already. So I think that they are very dialed in with limiting their sugar intake because they know how pervasive it is and they know they don't need it. and they know not to base their, pleasure off of it. They get pleasure from other things. And they also know about the health effects that it can come later in life if they do too much of it. And I think, they're keen on not having those things happen.
Thank you. So how are you going to navigate Halloween next week at your house? Do you hand out glow sticks?
Oh, yeah. So I've always been that mom who, sends in the little goodie bag. When the kids were small, I'd send in the goodie bag with the little toys and the glow sticks and the kind of slap bracelets, all the junky stuff that isn't candy. Another thing that a company that I've been working with the past couple years now, they make a great product. They're called Crispy Fruit. They make basically just freeze dried fruit, and it comes in individual bags. It's great for when you're traveling or on the go. I hand those out, and it's just
Or the That's It bars from Costco. It's just fruit.
fruit. Yeah, perfect. So
Yeah.
there's ways that you can, participate. I mean, my kids have never sat out of anything because they're not having sugar, overdoing it on the sugar. They go to every birthday party, they've participated in every celebration, but sometimes we just do it a little different. So yeah, we'll have a different type of treat that we're bringing in. And especially even with like the class parties, like whenever it's the holiday parties or the Halloween parties at school, they want a mom or a dad to sign up to bring in cupcakes, and I'll sign up and I'll bring in, something that's not a cupcake. And guess what? The kids are fine, they don't care. They're just happy to have a party. So I think it's just a matter of kind of making these adjustments, and we can change the norm, right? I think it's just a matter of enough people have to start to do it, then it'll change. And I really am hopeful that we're headed in that direction, because we really do need to de-sugar as much as we can Halloween, because it is the official
Oh
kickoff
my
of
God,
sugar
that's
season.
when everybody goes downhill, and then you don't hear from them till January
I
2nd.
know. And again, it's almost like this critical window that we need to protect, right? Because we shouldn't just throw the towel in because the holidays are coming up. We shouldn't just say, I'll start January 1st. No,
Oh, it's
no.
January 2nd, though. It's not even the first.
I know. We keep pushing it back. Pretty soon it'll be the 5th and
Martin Luther King birthday, then presidents.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
start Easter. Yeah.
yeah.
It's such a
So
free slope. I just want people to know there is hope. People put me to this high dietary standard, like this perfect SOS free person, like Dr. Goldhammer, who you heard when
yeah,
he was on. I don't eat sugar as a food, but for example, I go to a sushi restaurant, there's going to be some sugar in that ginger and maybe
guaranteed.
a bit in the teriyaki sauce, which is a dipping sauce. It doesn't, maybe 12 years ago, it would have bothered me, but I don't do it I do it once a week at the most. It
Yeah,
doesn't trigger me to go binge, and it's in the context of a savory meal. It's not
right,
dessert.
right, right. And I think that, that's the key, is understanding, look, it's like dust in your house. You can't avoid it. You can dust all day long and there's still going to be dust in your house no matter what you do. But it's just understanding that, for me with sugar, I want to try to have it be intentional. I want to know that if I want sugar and I want something sweet, I'm going to have it. And in order to do that, I have to make sure that I'm limiting it as much as possible everywhere else, so that it's not just one of these things that's just,
Insidious.
insidious. Exactly. Perfect word for it.
Yeah.
Perfect word for it.
It's like Michael Pollan says, treat treats as treats. But I find, because I really stopped eating sugar in 2003, that I don't really crave it anymore. And I
No.
like my sweets less sweet. So even bananas, when they get nice and spotty, which are perfect for like baking recipes, I don't want to eat them anymore. I prefer them on the green side now if I'm going
Yeah.
to eat. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's true. The longer time you put between things, the easier it gets. And I tell people that, like, the first couple weeks it's gonna be tough, but the at some point you miss it less and less. And then it just becomes so far away from what you do and how you eat. And it just, you don't even miss it. And I know that can sound like, oh yeah, right, but it's the truth. It's just a matter of, putting in the time and figuring it out, and it'll happen. And it does get 1,000 times easier.
It's just like, Dr. Goldhammer, I keep referring to him because he logged on with you accidentally. He says we're living in a world designed to make us fat, sick, and miserable. And everywhere we go, from the pet store to Staples. I mean, why is there, okay, why is there candy at a pet store? Dogs can't eat chocolate. I never could understand that.
Yeah, it started with the staples and the office supply. Like, you don't need chocolate to do your job unless you're working at the chocolate factory and you're the taster at the chocolate factory. Like, there's no need for all that. Your employees don't need it. So why is it there? But yes, you're right. It's just become um overly invasive. And I think that, the more we can do to limit it, the better we're all gonna be.
Absolutely. Linda would like to know if diet sodas and sugar substitutes are just as addictive as sugar. This is a good one.
Oh, Linda, I am glad that you asked that because I have to tell you, the answer is yes. And I hate to say this because I know people don't want to hear that, but it's the sweet taste that drives the addiction like response. And we've done studies on this. So I would advise that, if you need to use these artificial sweeteners or alternative sweeteners as a crutch to get you off of sugar, then go ahead. But the end goal really shouldn't be, to just swap those in, right? The end goal should be to decrease our dependence on sweetness. And that's going to be something that, might take some time and might need, some help along the way with these other types of sweeteners. But I don't think it's a good idea to just make those the end game. I think the end game really needs to be to decrease our dependence on sweeteners in general.
And doesn't the research show it really doesn't help people lose weight because it dials up that the cravings?
Absolutely. There's been study after study that has been shown from major research institutions like Harvard, for example, that, you know, these alternative sweeteners, they're like a bad boyfriend. Like, they come off as being this like great idea, but at the end of the day, they're really not a great idea. You end up eating more food later on than you would have if you had just had something with real sugar in it. And especially people who struggle with obesity, that's exacerbated in that population. So again, you might save 100 or 200 calories right now, but if you're eating 600 more calories later, then what's the point? It's really not helping you in the long term.
Yeah, nice. So Anita would like to know, how long does it take to go through the withdrawal process getting off of sugar? How can we get through the cravings to get to the other side?
Um, I think that the idea is when you get the cravings to first of all ask yourself, is this a actual craving or is this a hedonic craving? Is it a hedonic craving, meaning I just want to feel good? And if it's like I want to feel good, I know the food's going to make me feel good, then you have to say to yourself, okay, well, I don't need food to make me feel good. I can do something else. I can go pet my dog, or I can go outside and walk around the house, or I can, get up and go talk to somebody in the office next door to me. Do something else to feel good. Don't let food be the only thing that makes you feel good. And when you can start to recognize that, that can, interrupt those cravings. Now, another thing is, I think it's important to be able to distract yourself from a craving. If you're craving, some sort of pastry because you smelled it when you walked past the bakery that sells them, and you don't really want it, but you just now suddenly can't stop thinking about it. It's a matter of just putting time between you and that stimulus of that craving, right? So the longer you can distract yourself, the easier it's going to be to resist it and to not give into that craving. So again, having a backup plan, having an awareness of what you're actually experiencing is just so important, because when you don't have that, that's when people just, kind of say, "Oh, I'm craving this. Okay, I want it. I'm going to have it," and give in. So you do need to, put some work into kind of building up your toolbox there so that you can manage those cravings when they do hit you, because they will come, because they're, intrinsic, meaning we get them in our mind, right? They just pop into our mind, but then they're also extrinsic, meaning the advertisements, the smells. That's why you see, all the fast food restaurants, like they have their logo all over everything on the store. Every takeaway piece that you get has the logo because it's an advertisement to get you to crave it too. So when you know all that and start to learn about how that's affecting your brain, I think it can really be helpful so that you say to yourself, well, you know what, I'm not falling victim to this. I'm going to be in charge of my own behavioral decisions, and I'm not going to let, the marketing, reel me in here.
Dr. Frank Sabatino often says that food addiction slash sugar addiction is the only addiction that we can just do in public, at our desks at work, at our desks at school. No other addiction could you do in front of everybody like that.
Absolutely. No, it's the most socially acceptable addiction that's out there. I mean, can you imagine if people who are struggling with alcohol addiction, like if you were allowed to drink at work and, alcohol was served at the preschool parties and like all of these
Oh,
things.
that
I mean, it'd be a wild time, right? But it would be, it's in many cases helpful for people who do struggle with alcohol addiction because they know they're safe spaces. You could go certain places and you don't have alcohol pushed on you all the time. But that's not the case with sugar. It's everywhere and it's allowed to be everywhere.
right. And the thing is the worst place that I find is it's in people's home. And man, I haven't coached people privately for many years because the biggest challenge I had is the unwillingness for them to clean up their environments. But my kid likes this and my husband likes this. And I find that with other addictions, if you go to rehab like Betty Ford for alcohol or drugs, you don't come home to a house full of drugs and alcohol
No.
and get sober. But with, they keep, if you keep your addiction in the house, I don't see how people can white knuckle it and really get over it when you're living in it.
It's so hard, and that's why it's so important to have a social support team, have the rest of the people in your house on board with what you're trying to do if you're trying to make some of these changes because it's for their health too, right? It's not like, they're suffering because you're trying to eat healthier, right? Everyone's going to benefit from you being healthier and everyone's going to benefit from eating healthier things. So, yeah, I mean, I tell people, if they get pushback from their kids or loved ones that live at home with them about not having ice cream in the house, say, well, go to the ice cream store and get yourself an ice cream if you want one. But we don't need to have it live here with us because that's going to be a problem. And it's not something that we need in our freezer. But if you want to have it, go out and get it. Get in the car or go walk to the store and get it.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really wonderful conversation and so timely, just in time for Halloween. So thank you so much, Dr. Avena. And guys, click the link below because you can help Dr. Avena and everybody out by just answering for about 10 minutes these questions about the research of sugar addiction. It's completely free. It'll just take a few minutes of your time and it would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you so much, Chef AJ. It's been such a pleasure to see you. And thanks everyone for listening.
It's always great to see you, Dr. Avena. And thanks to all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ and Friends. Please come back Monday at 11.